Okay, well, I'm the lucky last for the day. Hope you're all having a lovely, lovely day. Um, all right, everybody. I'm going to go slightly slow for the connection and for respecting the translators who are doing a fabulous job of translating everything that we are speaking. So thank you to the translators for doing this. I'm going to go slightly slow, but if my slowness becomes too slow for you, please let me know. Okay, so this morning, I received a message from my mother, which read, "You are so stubborn and you always have been, but I will pray for your safety as you travel to the parts of the world where safety is a concern." Well, of course, my mother hasn't realized that I am speaking to you all virtually today. But more importantly, that response that I will pray for your safety is culturally so Indian. You know, in India, prayers is our answer for everything. And I'm going to live up to my culture and as an Indian, start off today by saying, I pray for your safety and health wherever you are in this world. And for those of you who have showed up today, I want to thank you for your courage because I know it's not been an easy choice. Well, talking about culture, I want to share with you today the story of one of my most exciting and challenging projects where we used storytelling to catalyze one of the most traditional corporate culture in the world. So with me so far, can I just get a little high? Yes, no, yeah, with me? Okay, all right, wonderful. Okay, so let's start unfolding the story of this project. I want to take you back to April 2018. I had just landed at Fukuoka International Airport, Japan. And from there, I took a 1 hour Shinkansen, the really fast bullet train ride to the beautiful city of Hiroshima. Now that train ride really changed the visual story I had in my mind of Hiroshima. Before that ride, I used to think about Hiroshima like a city that had to bear the consequences of atomic bombs for a very, very long time. But as I sat in the train and I looked outside, the mountains, the water, the fields, and the beautiful cherry blossom completely reshaped what Hiroshima meant to me in my imagination. But I'm not there for sightseeing. Clearly, I'm there because in that beautiful city of Hiroshima is a semiconductor manufacturing factory that has 3,000 employees, which was established in the year 1999, was Japanese owned, and had a very, very traditional Japanese culture. You know, the kind of culture where people are so in sync with each other that you don't even have to complete your sentences and everybody knows who's saying what. People look the same, they eat the same, they dress the same, they behave the same, and essentially the entire worldview is the same, and same. But the problem now was that that same factory got bought over by an American multinational. There was a new American leader on board who had a new vision for the factory, of course. And the new vision was to make that factory the model site for diversity, equality, and inclusion, a very popular trending topic in the corporate world. When I first heard that, I thought, oh my God, another leadership who's after getting some good PR from the diversity, equality, and inclusion angle. So I asked the leader, why diversity, equality, and inclusion? Where does this even come from? And he pointed me towards some recent newspaper articles in Japan that really showcased the reality of the nation for me. It was clearly written that Japan had a real problem with shrinking and aging workforce. So he said to me, look at this. If we do not hire more foreigners, if we do not get more younger people to work in this very traditional male Japanese working culture environment in the factory, and if we don't get more women to work in this factory, we have no factory in time to come. All right. The factory didn't want diversity, equality, and inclusion. They had to have diversity, equality, and inclusion. The case was made. So I then and turned around and asked the leadership team, then what's the problem? It's a very clear case of why you need it. That's where I got the pin drop silence. Nobody said anything. Why? Because the factory had already done the easy part. And I say the easy part, and you will understand why it is an easy part. The factory people had already done the easy part of going and getting more women in the factory, because there is a large proportion of women engineers in Japan who are not in the workforce. They had already done the part of hiring foreign talent. They'd already done the hard part of going and getting younger talent to work in that factory. Then what was the problem? We had diversity already. The problem was that even with full strength, the performance was stagnant. Despite having exactly the number of people you needed to have, the needle of performance was not moving. Then when we looked closer, what we realized was that the real problem lied not with diversity, but with inclusion. We had people working together who didn't know how to work together. So say, for example, there are 10 people in a team. 6 come from the traditional male Japanese culture, and 4 are from this new sort of a culture that have come in. These 4 don't know how to work with the rest of the 6, and therefore the 6 who are from the same culture are having to fulfill the role of the other 4. So it was a culture of a burnout. But the challenge was, bringing inclusion would mean you would need to change the culture of the factory, the culture of how it operated. So they had diversity, no inclusion. Inclusion will demand a new culture change. We had to very clearly shift people from a traditional male Japanese culture to a new corporate culture that believed in inclusion. And that is where stories came to the rescue. So if you are here today to learn about stories and culture and how to storyfy your culture, I will now be sharing what are some of the practical things I learned from this 2-year-long project. And this is also the time for you to pull out your pen and paper, because all practical things start to surface now. So I'll start off by telling you one line that I learned from this entire project, and then I will decode that line for you. So the line would be, if you want to change the culture overall in an organization, you have to adopt an identity of a change maker. So you have to be a change maker. But in the process of you adopting the identity of the change maker, all of those people, which includes you, who will make this change happen, will need to adopt 5 other identities. So I will repeat that. And if it is still confusing, don't worry, it's meant to be confusing, because I will then decode this for you further. So let's try and help you understand this. So here, right over here, there's the person who wants to change the culture, the change maker. But in the process of making the change happen, this person is going to have to adopt 5 other identities. And these identities are that of different kinds of storytellers that we hear about all the time. You know, the marketer, the reflective, the journalist, the reporter, the visionary. And I will take you through all of these one by one. So very quickly, where we've come so far. So the factory had diversity, but had no inclusion. Inclusion was a cultural requirement which would require people to shift from a traditional male Japanese culture to becoming a new modern global company culture that believed in inclusion. Now, stories were the tool we used to make that change happen. So if you are somebody who makes the change happen in an organization, changes the culture in the organization, then you are a change maker. But before you can call yourself a change maker, you have to wear 5 different types of storytelling identities. Sometimes you'll put the cap on yourself, and sometimes you'll put the cap on someone else who's going to be a part of this process. So let me just quickly check. You're all with me so far? You're getting the points I'm making? Yes? No? Yeah? Can I just get a little yes there? Otherwise, I'm going to slow down. Yeah? Okay, wonderful. You're getting the points I'm making so far. Let's see how stories came to the rescue. So the first thing I did in that factory, along with the help of the leadership team, was to adopt the identity of a journalist. So we all became journalists. What does journalists do? Journalists go and find stories because there was agreement in the factory, not alignment. Everybody nodded their head in agreement and said, we want inclusion, we want inclusion, we want inclusion. But nobody really in practice was making inclusion possible. It wasn't an action. It was just a nod in agreement. So agreement is not alignment. I can say to you, next conference, I will fly to your destination. But that could just be an agreement. When I really do fly there, will be alignment with what I'm saying. Agreement is not alignment. Not that the people did not want to include, it's just that they didn't know where exactly was inclusion breaking down. We went around and we started collecting little stories, little moments where we could see exactly where inclusion breaks. Because the will to want to change in people existed, they just didn't know where they were going wrong. So I'll give you some examples of the kinds of stories we got. So one of the story that we got was of this woman who says, a woman engineer, that I went to work and I was so excited that I was the part of the main team. I was really thrilled. And 2 days later, my supervisor called me and said to me, you're now part of the sub-team. You're not in the main team. She said, I felt so not included. But when you talk to the same supervisor and get his perspective on the story, he says that, the day I realized that this project was going to be so complex, I decided that I'm going to not make her the part of the main team. She has 2 children at home. It's going to be very hard for her to keep up the workload. But then they both didn't communicate to each other what was going on. There was silence. One felt not included. The other one felt like they were doing the right thing. The second thing I noticed was there were lots of these stories that were coming out from every time a female engineer went to the toilet and came back, there was some act of non-inclusion by the supervisor. The supervisor would not talk properly, would not include the person in the woman supervisor in the meeting. So the supervisor, the woman engineer would get really, really upset. She felt non-inclusive. Now, when you talk to the supervisor, he revealed to us that the problem is when I send these women on break, they don't come back for 25 minutes. A break is meant to be 5 to 10 minutes. All my male supervisors come back. All my male engineers come back. They take way too long. And therefore, the workflow gets disrupted. Oh, when we investigated that, we realized that in this factory that was built for predominantly male Japanese worker, there were very few cubicles in the female bathroom, so the queues were really, really long. But guess what? The women hadn't even realized that. They thought that all bathrooms are like that. You only have 1 or 2 cubicles, which was such a contrast to the number of bathrooms that were there in the male facilities. So therefore, when we brought these realities in front of people, people realized, that's why these issues are happening. In another story, a foreign worker says, I sat in the orientation learning all things Japanese, technical Japanese, in the language that I don't even understand. So I sat through the entire orientation in a language I don't even understand. I couldn't fathom as to why and how that would even be possible. So when we investigated that, we realized that anybody who's hired in that factory has to have some basic knowledge of Japanese. But polite Japanese is very different to technical Japanese. So when these people come, they think, oh, you know basic Japanese, go to orientation. But when they sit in the orientation and the technical part comes in, everything is an overhead transmission. Story after story revealed to us areas where acts of inclusion were not there. We took all the stories, we coded all the stories, and then I'm just going to quickly show you this data. I don't expect you to read it. When the stories were coded, you can see the largest part, no matter you take cross-cultural theme, you take gender, you take intergenerational, communication was the largest barrier to making the culture of inclusion. Actually, you know what? I'm wrong. It's not even communication. It is miscommunication. It was not the problem with what was being said. The problem was with what was not being said or how what was being said. So once we collected these stories, we prioritized miscommunication and we shared the stories factory-wide with people as to where the inclusion was not taking place. We realized that people started to understand where their behaviors were going wrong. And they said, oh my God, that's where I thought I was doing the right thing. But what I was actually doing was the wrong thing. So we started to see change in behavior. And I thought, to be very honest, my job is done. And these people now know where exactly inclusion breaks down. I can pack my bags, put my invoice to the client, and go back to Singapore. Especially on one of the days when I heard from one of the leaders, he said, last night, I went back to my office and I saw a woman engineer working late. I said to her, why are you working so late? You know, isn't your husband going to be upset with you? I said that to her and I said, oh, I'm so sorry. I would never say that to a male engineer. That was not being inclusive. I'm not going to say that to you again. So that woman engineer then said to him, you know, it's all right. I feel really bad when they treat us like women engineer and not just engineers. So when I heard stories of change like this, I was becoming really, really happy and thinking, you know what? I can go back to Singapore. But I was so wrong. After we had adopted the identity of journalist, which is right here, what I didn't realize that I had 4 more identities to adopt before I could finally say the project had seen success. So let's keep moving. So I'm going to do a quick revision for you. Diversity was there. No inclusion was there. So we said, let's just show them where exactly inclusion is breaking down. Go become a journalist, find stories, show them the problems, put them into data, code it. It's not communication, it's miscommunication that's the real challenge. Change of behavior starts to take place. You feel so proud of yourself and really satisfied pushing that invoice to your client because you've truly lived up to their expectation. And then something happens. What happened just a couple of days before I was leaving was I overheard two people talk. One of them was a foreign national and the other one was a Japanese national. I just happened to hear them. One of them said, the foreign national said to the Japanese national that although we understand where inclusion breaks down and we can bring about that behavior change, our primary goal is really performance. I still don't get what is this whole inclusion nonsense. And the Japanese person turns around and says to him that this factory has done so well for so long without having to, keep saying inclusion, inclusion, inclusion. And I don't know why suddenly this new leadership wants all this inclusion. And every time we talked about shrinking workforce or making the site a model site for diversity, equality, and inclusion, people had a similar reaction. One, making a site a model site for diversity, equality, and inclusion sounds like a good thing a leader would do to get a medal. And to be very honest with you, shrinking workforce and aging workforce in Japan is the nation's problem, not my problem. And that's where I realized I still had a lot of work to do. The next identity, everybody, that we adopted was that of a marketer. So I put on my marketer's hat. What does a marketer storyteller do really well? A marketer storyteller has succeeded for years by giving you a nudge to the new identity. You know that ad that you saw in the TV, a girl with scruffy hair, and then you have this shampoo. She uses this shampoo and she has this slick, beautiful hair, and now she has all the confidence she needs in this world. That is the job of a marketer storyteller. I realized I needed to show these people what's in it for them if they decide to change the culture. We went back into the boardroom. We took all the stories we had and we started to really decode. Through a long process of discussion and decoding, we realized that the identity we were going to position for these people to become inclusive in culture was going to be quality of life. One of the things that everybody suffered in this organization was long working hours, no work-life balance at all. So we said, you will become a person who has a perfect work-life balance and will have a quality of life should you change the culture from a traditional male Japanese culture to an inclusive modern-day corporate culture. And that's when people started to see something. We needed to tell them stories to facilitate that positioning. One of the stories was told by the IT head of the factory where he said, remember that big outage that happened where everybody was scrambling their head trying to figure out how to fix? The 5 people who went into the server room to try and fix that situation. Once we fixed that situation after 72 hours of non-stop work, I noticed it's the same 5 people who do this job every single time this happens. Not unless we start getting new people to learn these new skills by including them, these 5 people are going to have the quality of life they deserve. We started to see the change. For quality of life, people wanted to change the culture. And then I thought my job was done. But then I realized one of the leaders said to me, I love the change I'm seeing, but I still don't feel like it's a change we own. All of us, 3,000 of us in the factory, are just following the directive. You guys came up with the quality of life proposition. You told us the story and we saw our mistakes, but it's yet not our story. That's when we realized it was time for me to hand over the cap to them, not to wear a storyteller cap myself. I had already been a marketer. I had already been a journalist. It was time to get them to wear the visionary hat, the visionary storyteller hat. Remember, all these identities for one change maker identity in the end. So the next thing that we did was perhaps one of the best things I have done in this entire project. I decided, along with the leadership team, that all the main leaders. There were several layers. The first top two layers, which are close to 90 leaders, will be tasked with coming up with a 15 to 18 minute TED-style talk on why the culture change is the right thing for them to do. Visionary leaders are the leaders who show you a successful future where you are so successful along with a successful organization. We tasked these leaders to come up with that particular 15 to 18 minute story from their own perspective. Now, that is where the beauty of that entire thing started to shape. As we put on the visionary hat task on these leaders, they had to adopt the identity of reflective storytellers. We created tension with silence. We took them into the room, and the first question we asked them was, look back in your life and tell me, when did it hurt to be minority? When did it hurt to be so good at your job and yet not be able to contribute? When did you feel little than little and felt like just because I don't belong to this culture, even all my competency is evaporated? When we gave that space for reflection and we created tension by silence, these leaders started to dig deep. 90 of them started to dig deep and take out, experiences from their life where being minority hurt so much. And that's when they started realizing what the other people were feeling being minority, because they were not the minority in this particular situation. So I'll share a couple of stories with you. So some of them used stories from their university days. Some of them used stories from their work days. So here's a story from university day. This leader is originally from Singapore. So he's now working in Japan, and he says, I was not born in Singapore. I was born in China. My hometown is a small village in China. My mother still lives there. In 1992, I was still in university, and I received a letter from the government that I have an opportunity to study in Singapore. Perfect work-life balance, and we'll have a quality of life should you change the culture from a traditional male Japanese culture to an inclusive modern-day corporate culture. And that's when people started to see something. We needed to tell them stories to facilitate that positioning. One of the stories was told by the IT head of the factory, where he said, remember that big outage that happened where everybody was scrambling their head trying to figure out how to fix? The 5 people who went into the server room to try and fix that situation. Once we fixed that situation after 72 hours of non-stop work, I noticed it's the same 5 people who do this job every single time this happens. Not unless we start getting new people to learn these new skills by including them, these 5 people are going to have the quality of life they deserve. We started to see the change. For quality of life, people wanted to change the culture. And then I thought my job was done. But then I realized one of the leaders said to me, I love the change I'm seeing, but I still don't feel like it's a change we own. All of us, 3,000 of us in the factory, are just following the directive. You guys came up with the quality of life proposition. You told us the story and we saw our mistakes, but it's yet not our story. That's when we realized it was time for me to hand over the cap to them, not to wear a storyteller cap myself. I had already been a marketer. I had already been a journalist. It was time to get them to wear the visionary hat, the visionary storyteller hat. Remember, all these identities for one change maker identity in the end. So the next thing that we did was perhaps one of the best things I have done in this entire project. I decided, along with the leadership team, that all the main leaders, there were several layers. The first top 2 layers, which are close to 90 leaders, will be tasked with coming up with a 15 to 18 minute TED-style talk on why the culture change is the right thing for them to do. Visionary leaders are the leaders who show you a successful future where you are so successful along with a successful organization. We tasked these leaders to come up with that particular 15 to 18-minute story from their own perspective. Now, that is where the beauty of that entire thing started to shape. As we put on the visionary hat task on these leaders, they had to adopt the identity of reflective storytellers. We created tension with silence. We took them into the room, and the first question we asked them was, look back in your life and tell me, when did it hurt to be minority? When did it hurt to be so good at your job and yet not be able to contribute? When did you feel little than little and felt like just because I don't belong to this culture, even all my competency is evaporated? When we gave that space for reflection and we created tension by silence, these leaders started to dig deep. 90 of them started to dig deep and take out, experiences from their life where being minority hurt so much. And that's when they started realizing what the other people were feeling being minority, because they were not the minority in this particular situation. So I'll share a couple of stories with you. So some of them used stories from their university days. Some of them used stories from their work days. So here's a story from university day. This leader is originally from Singapore. So he's now working in Japan, and he says, I was not born in Singapore. I was born in China. My hometown is a small village in China. My mother still lives there. In 1992, I was still in university, and I received a letter from the government that I have an opportunity to study in Singapore. And my professor said, you go. You don't think these opportunities too much. Just go. So I said, I will go. He said, one of the saving grace was that I knew how to speak in English, even though I was from China. And in Singapore, everybody spoke English. Ha! Then he comes to Singapore and he says, when I started studying here, I was really challenged because Singapore is one of the most diverse places in the world. There are people from so many different nationalities. One professor spoke English, but it was Singaporean English. The other professor spoke Indian English. The other professor spoke Chinese English. And the respective nationalities influenced the way they spoke, left me confused, filled with self-doubt. Sometimes I felt I am not smart at all. Those were some very tough days for 19-year-old me away from my home. It was in those moments when they started to shift their knowledge of being minority into an understanding of what is being minority. So you see, you can have knowledge. You can say, yeah, that's how it feels to be minority. But understanding is experiencing something. So we started to hear through reflective storytellers, we started to hear stories of such nature. One leader said, oh, actually, when I was a manager, I went to work in Virginia, United States. And when I landed there, I sat in meetings and people spoke so fast in English, I couldn't get my head around it. My palms sweated. And when somebody would ask me something, I would just nod my head. And I thought that I am so not smart. One person said I went for a dinner with my colleagues in Massachusetts. And when I was there, all the American colleagues were sitting. I was sitting, and I had finally thought we were going to be friends and we could talk to each other freely. And one of my colleagues said, holy cow. And I got up in the middle of the dinner and said, where is the cow? Where is the cow? And everybody started laughing. A very funny moment now, but at that time, I really felt the pinch of being minority. So when we made these leaders, gave them the task of being visionaries, they also became reflective. And that is where the real change started to happen. Transformational culture work is always relational. It is not transactional. Real diversity, equity, inclusion work is not about a checklist. It is about relationships, and ownerships. So the last identity that we wanted these people to adopt was that of a reporter. What does a reporter do? Now, a journalist generally goes and finds stories, but reporter is someone who reports. Journalists can be reporters and reporters cannot be journalists. But the point is that those who are able to tell the story well usually are reporters. So we also created a learning program for them, not forgetting that even though we want them to visionaries, they are time poor people who have to be extremely productive and efficient. So a structured approach to preparing a TED Talk, a TED style talk, was really, really essential for these people. Therefore, to make them a reporter style storyteller who could tell the TED Talk really well, we had to design a structured approach to learning. That is how they really quickly enabled themselves to be able to become a visionary storyteller. What's the change, you would say? The change we started to see was in little symptoms. The first talk ever delivered by the leader, out of the 3,000 people, 100 people showed up. By the time it was the sixth talk, 2,500 people showed up. And by the time it was on to the 10th and the 11th talk, almost everybody from the factory started to show up because they started to find meaning in changing the culture of the organization. But wait, the best part about this, I will tell you in a minute. Before that, I'm going to do a summary of what I have said. So you have to show, again, if you're responsible for storifying your culture, if you're responsible for changing the culture, you have to be a change maker at heart. But to be able to become a change maker, you have to have 5 storyteller identities in place. You have to show people where inclusion breaks down, because inclusion is the culture you want. You are a journalist. You have to give a nudge to the new identity where people see themselves from suffering to have good time to having good quality of time to becoming a marketer storyteller. You have to give people you have to give people the ownership of the story. That is where they become visionary storyteller. What is the difference between just a storyteller and a visionary storyteller? A visionary storyteller has a vision for the future where they show you along with the organization how you will be successful too. And in the process of becoming a visionary, these people become reflectives, they dig deep, they make the work relational and not transactional. They start to go from knowledge to understanding of what it is to be minority. And then you have to give them a skills repertoire where they become reporter storyteller. And that is how you catalyze change with stories in one of the most traditional corporate cultures in the world. That factory today, everyone, is the best places to work in Japan. And that leader that I met in Hiroshima, who had the new vision to make the factory the model site for diversity, equity, and inclusion, is now in United States with a much bigger portfolio, making the change happen with stories all around and really setting up the culture of success within the organization, and his own success is soaring too. That's all I have for you. I will now hand it over back to Artem.
No words, literally. You've done a terrific job. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
There are a couple of questions, and we've gone a bit over time, but I saw this comment saying, give her more time, she's so awesome. And I totally agree. So let's go over them in a pace. The difference between the reporter and journalist is not quite clear. Can you share more, maybe an example?
Okay, so I'm going to share this with an example as you've asked. So one of my favorite podcast is called Lazarus Heist, which is about cyber hacking. So the gentleman who actually made that podcast, he is a journalist. His name is Jeff Head, I think Jeff Head. And he wrote a post on LinkedIn. He said that earlier in my career, one of the newspaper person said to me that you are not good with your words. Although you're a really good journalist, you can collect really good information and good stories, you don't essentially tell them well. So therefore, we have to get a reporter to tell your stories. So journalists can be reporters, but they're not always reporters. Some journalists are really good at collecting stories and then handing them over to reporters to tell them well. So that's the fundamental difference between a reporter and a journalist. So a journalist can do both, but not essentially all the time.
Thank you so much. There is this next question. So there are 5 heads. Can you just sum them up a little bit? Because people are missing the 5th.
Oh, okay. So see, this is you who wants to make the change happen by changing the culture. So if you start here, in this process, I did not start here. Depending on what the task is, you will wear the different head. But to build a connection with your audience and to really figure out why they should listen to what you're trying to say, you have to adopt the marketer storytellers. Remember I gave the shampoo example? Marketers are really good at understanding the point of view, like the world view. Why does this person want what he or she wants? That's the first type of storyteller. The second is reflective. Reflective is someone we see a lot in the corporate world where leaders have to reflect deep and take out stories from their own experiences and share them with people. Then there is a journalist. Journalist doesn't tell their own life stories. They go find stories on the ground as to what's happening, right? And then there is a reporter. Reporter is someone who may take the story from the journalist and say, now I will shape it to how it needs to be told for better effect. And then finally, there is a visionary. Visionary is someone who can show you the future, the success of the future. So I'll make it very easy for you. If any one of you reads books, then here's the thing. If you read any of Seth Godin's book, then he is a marketer storyteller. If you read Malcolm Gladwell's book, he's a journalist storyteller. If you read the guy who founded Zappos, Tony Hsieh, he was a reflective storyteller. And if you look at Martin Luther King's speech, then he's a visionary storyteller. So there are all these people who are different types of storytellers. And to make a change happen, you have to wear all these 5 hats at different occasions.
Okay, thank you so much. That was really clear. And we still have a lot of questions in the chat, actually. So here's what I'm going to propose. We have a Telegram chat, guys. And I know it's leaded in Russian, but you can always join. And Anjali, if you would like to join it, to, have a chat with people, please feel free to come in and we can always continue there. It's an open discussion, nothing like no tricks here. So with that, I'll just go to the last question. I'm really curious to know what your opinion is. So the culture is forming the stories we tell, and stories shape the culture. So what goes first, culture or story, and why?
Okay, so I thought a lot about this. Okay, so for me, culture comes first. Let's go back to the factory in Japan. If in absence of a clear corporate culture, they were becoming a traditional male Japanese culture. So if you don't have a corporate culture, the natural tendency of people is to belong to the nationality culture that they have, which becomes really, really hard for global organizations. The other thing I would say, I learn immensely from screenwriters and scriptwriters. One of my favorite screenwriters said, what we put in stories, in movies that you see, is only a reflection of what is the truth of the society. The culture that exists in the society is what comes out in the forms of stories. If you don't have a defined culture, the stories will be haywire. Stories are just symptoms of culture. They're not the culture themselves. You want to change the stories, change the culture, the vice versa doesn't happen.
I absolutely love it. Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure. And let me say once again, thank you so much for joining us this year. It means a lot to see you and to feel your support. Everyone, let's put all the fires we have for Anjali. That was amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I want to close off today by saying, Atom, you are inspirational. As much as you are saying thank you to me, I want to say thank you to you. I could never do what you have done, pulling us all together, making sure we all show up. So thank you for your courage and thank you for all that you do for all of us. May you be so, so successful this year that I look at you from at the below of the stage and say, can I have your autograph, please?
Only if it's an exchange, because I'm waiting for your book and for everyone. Anjali is having a book coming up. Now you cannot turn away because we just promised to everyone. So yeah, thank you so much once again. It was
Thank you
lovely.
all.
Please.
I wish you all the best. I will join the Telegram, everyone. So just make it easy for me. Write it in English. That's all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Have a lovely tomorrow and the rest of the conference days. Lots of love. Bye-bye.